Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
21 minutes after 8, of course we'll come back to your views about Boris Johnson and indeed the Chancellor. That's what we're about, LBC, of course, in the mornings, getting your views. It'll be fascinating to get the view of my next guest. Delighted to welcome to the studio David, now Lord Frost, who served under Cabinet Office Minister under Boris Johnson until very recently, actually, December. He was the man charged with prosecuting our Brexit chief negotiator for exiting the European Union. Do you remember famously Boris Johnson, I think, saying, David, sign it, just sign it, or words to that effect? He was the Prime Minister's European advisor and also served in the past as a British ambassador to Denmark, so quite a career record. And he joins me in the studio. There's much to discuss, Lord Frost, about current developments, but we're 2 and a bit years into the Brexit that you signed. Were I to ask you to give it a grade as to how it has affected the British people, that is to say, A+, we're in a land of milk and honey, and C-, we're hanging in rags. Lord Frost, what's the grade and why? Morning.
Morning. Great to be here, Nick. Excellent to talk. So I think I'll give it 2 marks, if I'm allowed to do that.
Can.
So I think the Brexit we delivered, I would say, is A-. I'm marking my own work there a little bit. I would say minus because, as is well known, there's a bit of work to be done in Northern Ireland yet to get that completely right. I think then what are we doing to take advantage of Brexit? I think a lot has been done. There's a lot more we could be doing. So I'd be saying B brackets plus perhaps there.
What do we need to be doing, Lord Frost, that we should be doing in that area?
So
and that's a grade I'm more familiar with in my school days. By the way, when I wrote B+, I see it so many times on my work.
I think there's a lot more we could do. There's a lot we have done. The vaccine rollout, leading on Ukraine, and restoring democracy to the country. Let's not forget that is the most important point of Brexit. In many EU countries, you can't decide everything through elections. In this country, we now can. But I would like to see us doing more, for example, on planning reform, on procurement reform, on restoring flexible labour markets, reducing tariffs, going harder at free trade deals, all these sort of things, so that some of the benefits start to be visible and pay off.
You mentioned Ukraine. You probably saw a report in the newspapers last week that the European Union, in reference to our conversation about Brexit, the European Union was to, quote, resume its diplomatic presence and embassy staff in Kyiv after temporarily moving to Poland. My understanding is the UK has yet to do that. Should it?
It definitely should. Well done to the EU for getting their people back in there and working. I think we should. I'm sure Liz Truss and the PM will want our embassy back in there and operating. And I think
why
it's really important.
You have served as an ambassador, albeit not in the Ukraine, but why is it important to have an embassy presence?
Well, it's the best way of keeping up contacts with individuals face to face, understanding what's going on. I think particularly in current circumstances where normal comms are tricky at best to do, having people on the spot, understanding what's happening is extremely important.
Also, and again, you have no involvement in this personally, but are you, like me, a little disappointed? We have nearly 200,000 families in this country who've come forward and opened their hearts and their doors, and we seem to be having all sorts of problems actually getting Ukrainians to come in and avail themselves of this hospitality. And if you look at a country like Ireland, we are falling woefully behind. Lord Frost.
Yeah, I think this is one of the areas where we definitely could be doing better. I don't really understand why it's happened as it is. I think it's the main black mark on our Ukraine effort so far, which otherwise has been really good. It does seem to have got bogged down in bureaucracy and local council sort of form tickers and a process that maybe need not be as complicated and difficult as it seems to be. But, you know, that's what the British bureaucracy often does when it tries to accomplish a task. So I'm sorry to say I'm not surprised, but we really need to change this.
Can I push you a bit on that? Are you not surprised because it's landed at the door of the Home Office? I remind you, Windrush, Amber Rudd having to resign. There's no shortage of stories there, Lord Frost.
There definitely are difficulties in the Home Office, and I think Priti Patel will be the first to acknowledge that. But I think it's more a habit of the way our bureaucracy works to over-regulate, to over-complicate, to box-tick everything, and we're seeing that in this case.
But you know Boris Johnson as well as anybody. He's a former magazine editor and a journo. Why doesn't he just thump the desk and say, get it done?
I'm sure he is saying that, and I've seen him say that in other issues over the last 2 or 3 years, but the government doesn't control local council house inspectors. It isn't entirely in control of all the rules that are in place on a scheme like this, and thumping the table isn't enough. You have to have a machine that works, and actually, as we saw on COVID and some other things, the machine doesn't always work as well as we would like it to.
Please have a swig of your coffee as I just go through some of the other questions. Very grateful you arranged to come in some time ago. And of course, overnight, a fairly big story has developed regarding the Prime Minister. We now know that he and the Chancellor and the Prime Minister's wife have been found and have paid their fines, investigation by the Metropolitan Police. Your reaction to the Partygate and the fact that we have the first time a Prime Minister caught up in a legal affair such as this. Lord Frost.
Well, it's a very serious situation, I think. I don't think the one fixed penalty notice is in itself grounds for resignation, but
it would appear he's misled the House. Lord Frost.
Well, this is what concerns me, and that's why I think it's not possible just to say that was then, this is now, let's move on, the world is different, as the government is trying to this morning. I don't think that's quite good enough. First of all, I think the Prime Minister is on record saying to Parliament that all the rules were observed and there were no parties. That's obviously not the case. And I think it's very important in our constitutional system that correct information is given to Parliament. So I hope the Prime Minister will come to the House on Tuesday and make it clear what the actual position is. The second concern is that this is an ongoing process. We don't yet know what other penalties may be issued and to whom. I think, as I saw suggested this morning, if there's some thought of bringing forward the Sue Gray report, I think that will be a good idea. I think it's important to bring transparency, to be clear what's happened, for the Prime Minister to make his case and people to judge him. I don't think it'll be enough just to say nothing to see here, move on. I think it would dog the party and it would dog the Prime Minister unless he could be clear and explain to people what happened and why.
But it's a difficult explanation, isn't it, Lord Frost? Unless you buy the idea he was ambushed by cake. He's either, well, has he lied or has he been misled? It has to be one of the two, doesn't it?
So I can't speculate. I think the Prime Minister has the right to be trusted, but that's why I think it's so important that he explains himself to Parliament and explains why he said what he did. It is very important that these constitutional proprieties are observed.
And you know him well. Would he have knowingly misled the House?
No, absolutely not. Every minister, from the Prime Minister down, knows that is something that just doesn't happen in our system. I'm confident he wouldn't have done that. I don't know whether he looked into things as much as he should have or whatever last November, December. I can't speculate about that. The important thing is to get it right now, to be clear, to explain what happened and to make the case and to try and move on the back of that. And unless he does that, I think it's going to be quite difficult.
There is an argument that had he listened to you, the great Frost, as he once called you, he might not be in the problems that he finds himself. You had concerns about the pettifogging rules that were being brought in and the lockdown and everything else. You spoke about your frustration there. Can you see a time you'd ever go back and work with him?
It's not really in my hands. I am happy.
Why did you feel it? Why did you resign your post last December over those COVID?
I couldn't support Plan B on COVID. I believed that much of what we had done on COVID in terms of rules, in terms of lockdowns, in terms of, as you say, all these rules, was not necessarily damaging to the country. And when I saw us apparently going back down that slope again, I thought that was a big enough issue for me to say I can't support that. And I spoke against it in Cabinet, and I couldn't support it. So that was the problem. And I'm very glad that the government did the right thing, nevertheless, in the decisions it took in December and January, and we're in a different place, and we're now in a different political world. I'm quite happy commenting in the media, in the press, giving speeches, and so on. I don't think the Lords is a place where you do serious politics, unfortunately. People have said to me that it is now possible to resign your Lord's seat and do something in the arena where it really matters, in the Commons, but I'm not pressing for that, and that's for others.
So what are your future plans or aspirations?
So I think the best thing I can do is contribute to the public debate as I'm doing now, and draw on my experience.
You're not joining LBC, are you? Everybody else seems to be doing it. Is this the new breakfast? Is this how they tell me now? It's a little bit brutal, isn't it? Broadcasting is as brutal as politics. Breakfast with Lord Frost. We'll have to drop the Lord. It's not. Honestly, it makes it a bit standard. It just had to be David.
I've no
You've
plans.
got a good name.
I've no plans to join LBC. I could
so what are you?
Great
I mean, as I say, you've got the right name for it, David Frost. You'll certainly get a lot of people. What are you going to do, Lord Frost?
So I'm going to. I'll be writing. I'll do some journalism. I'll do some work with think tanks. I would like to keep commenting, explaining, trying to shape the political debate in ways that are helpful, and doing what I can to keep Brexit on track, to support the government if it decides to take action in Northern Ireland, and to keep.
Are you going to resign from the House then of Lords?
I'm not planning to. No, I'm just saying
not out of the
question. People have drawn it to my attention that it's a possibility.
I don't envy you having to wade through the amount of trees they cut down for the documents you had to read and the ink that was on them. But one problem, you have actually referenced it twice now, Lord Frost, Northern Ireland. It didn't work, did it?
It isn't working. We had to take the decisions we did back in 2019 because Parliament had removed the option of leaving without a deal. The Constitution was being shredded. We had to deliver the referendum results, so necessarily the deal in 2019 was imperfect. We thought that it would work. We knew we were taking a risk. There was a lot in it we didn't want but was imposed on us. Unfortunately, it hasn't had the careful handling that it should have. And
by whom?
By the EU. The decision to try and activate Article 16 at the beginning of 2021 was a big problem. The decision to impose a vaccine border in January, albeit briefly, was a problem, and it's destroyed the moral basis of the protocol. It's very clearly undermining the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. We're going to have serious difficulties, I think, in the political situation in Northern Ireland after the elections, and I think it is obvious that the protocol, as it currently stands, cannot survive. It must be renegotiated, or the government must act unilaterally. And I simply don't understand why the EU will not renegotiate it and move on to a more collaborative relationship with us as we all want. But if you won't, then the government's responsibility is to govern this country, and it will have to take that in hand.
Why do you imagine the EU is rather deaf to our requests?
I genuinely don't know. Of course, they could say, "Well, you agreed it, you must implement it," but that's a kind of it's a truism. Treaties are, in practice, often renegotiated as circumstances change. It's obvious that there is a political difficulty which both sides, are engaged in, and the best way is to deal with this collaboratively. And perhaps in the new world where we're working together quite well on Ukraine and the circumstances have changed, they'll agree to do that. I really think they should.
Last couple of questions. President Zelensky has singled out Boris Johnson as effectively the most effective leader of the West. Would you concur with that? Do you think that, I hate to use this expression, but it's a journalistic expression, has he had, quotes, a good war?
Yeah, I don't really like the expression either, but I think he has. I think the government has generally got things right on Ukraine. We saw the problem. We tried to alert people to the problem. We have been extremely supportive of Zelensky. We've got weapons to him and so on. I think we've genuinely done the right thing, and I think the Prime Minister should be proud of that. This government has a lot of successes, and I hope this is going to be one of them.
Just coming back to Brexit, and I think you've been realistic enough to face this, we have major productions such as Andrew Lloyd Webber's production of Phantom of the Opera not being able to get into Europe. A Chinese production team has to go into it. I think you've also accepted that as regards musicians, can I put it to you, the Brexit deal failed them, Lord Frost?
So I don't think it failed them. You can't abolish free movement for the UK and expect other countries to carry on with free movement as if nothing had happened. So that's part of the deal. I think there was room for us and for both sides to be a bit more flexible on dealing with musicians and actors. It didn't seem to be possible in 2020. The EU were not being flexible. Circumstances were different. But I don't think we should necessarily rest there. And of course, it's possible to make technical improvements, and I hope we can do that in hopefully this new atmosphere.
Will Boris Johnson lead the Conservatives into the next general election?
I believe he will, if he does the right things, as I said earlier. If he makes his case, makes clear what goes on, regularises the position with Parliament. And
also,
I
he
think
has the cost of living to address, doesn't he, Lord Frost?
He does. And we've got the energy crisis. We've got a lot of things going on. It's going to be extremely difficult. I think people recognise that. I think when it comes to making the choice between Conservatives and Labour, the record of this government, Boris Johnson's leadership capabilities, the fact that we will have delivered so much will be important. So yes, I'm confident he will, but we must do the right things in these 2 years that remain to us.
And the blueprint for green energy, broadly speaking, did that hit the right note?
So I wasn't massively convinced that the energy security paper really changed anything much. I think it doesn't deal with the problem that it's all very well to build a lot of wind power, but it needs backup by other power for when the wind doesn't blow. And I didn't see that problem really addressed in the security paper. My worry is that the government is on a plan where it's not engaging with the trade-offs. It won't be possible to deliver net zero on the timetable they want, and we will end up with rationing and behavioural change. I think that'll be extremely bad outcome. I don't think the British people will put up with it.
Rationing?
I think that if we don't have the right amount of power on the grid at some point in the next 10 years, then obviously that is one of the things that could happen. And I noticed the government said it would nationalise the grid managers in this paper last week. So the government will have control over things it doesn't have control over at the moment. I think it's really important we don't go down that road. I really worry that our current policy, by not investing in secure, reliable power, i.e. gas, over the next 10 years, risks taking us into that situation. And I don't think last week's paper reassured me that we've got a grip on that.
Last week's paper's coverage of Rishi Sunak and his wife's tax affairs. Can Mr Sunak go into the election as Chancellor?
I think he can, absolutely. I don't think he did anything wrong, and I don't think his wife did. I think all laws have been observed.
If he didn't do anything wrong, why might he refer himself for an investigation?
So I think it's reasonable for him to want to have 100% clarity from Lord Geit. I do think that it is reasonable to ask that people who are ministers or closely connected to ministers in this country, see this country as their primary loyalty and residence. And so I think the Chancellor's wife has been right to correct that situation and move forward.
And you've never had a slice of birthday cake, a sausage roll, a flat beer or a glass of Prosecco at a party in Number 10 during lockdown? Lord Frost?
I haven't, no. I was a bit busy doing negotiations in Brussels and elsewhere during these years.
So it was rather difficult. I have, of course, remember, Drive Time is open on LBC at the moment. Our tremendous colleague Eddie Mayer will be standing. Drive with David Frost. It just sounds great. Is it something we could interest you in?
Maybe not today, but maybe one day.
Maybe in the future.
One day.
Lord Frost, thank you for coming by. You served as Cabinet Office Minister under Boris Johnson. You were the chief negotiator for exiting the European Union. You are a Conservative peer, and you're branching out into more communications. Thanks for your time, Lord Frost.
Thank you.
News next on LBC.
Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak say they want to carry on with their jobs despite paying fines for breaching coronavirus laws. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor received fixed penalty notices over a gathering at Number 10 in June 2020. Former Brexit Minister Lord Frost has just told Nick Mr Johnson should explain himself to Parliament next week. UK inflation has reached another 30-year high. Official figures show the Consumer Prices Index rose 7% in the year to March, up from 6.2%.